Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, but Marcus Hoffman still gripped the ceramic mug like it might anchor him to something solid. Through the kitchen window of what used to be his home, he watched his 7-year-old son Isaac chase fireflies in the backyard, the boy's laughter cutting through the thick summer air. In 3 days, none of this would be his anymore. "You're still here." Caroline's voice dripped with the particular contempt she'd perfected over the last 6 months. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled back in a way that made her look exactly like her mother. That should have been his first warning years ago. Marcus set down the mug carefully. 12 years of practice calm kept his voice level. "The custody hearing is Friday. I have until then." "The custody hearing." Caroline laughed, a sharp sound that made Isaac pause his playing outside. "You actually think you have a chance? My father's lawyer has already spoken to Judge Morrison. This is just a formality, Marcus. You'll get supervised visits if you're lucky. Every other weekend, if you can afford the fees." He'd met Caroline Gould 9 years ago at a community college where he'd been teaching night classes in Eastern European history. A quiet job for a quiet life, far from what he used to be. She'd been auditing courses, bored with her trust fund life, looking for something authentic. He'd been exactly that, authentic in his ordinariness, careful to be unremarkable. They'd married within a year. Isaac came a year after that. For 7 years, it had worked. He'd been a good husband, a devoted father, a reliable teacher. He'd buried everything else so deep he'd almost convinced himself it had never existed. Then Caroline's father, Thomas Gould, had his 3rd heart attack, and everything changed. "Your father's empire needs protecting," Marcus said quietly. "I get it. Can't have a nobody teacher married to the Gould princess when there's a real estate fortune at stake." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "Don't pretend you're noble in this. You signed a prenup. You're entitled to nothing. And Isaac deserves better than growing up in some rental apartment with a father who makes $40,000 a year." The prenup. He'd signed it because people who disappear don't argue about money. People who build new lives from nothing don't question their good fortune. He'd been so careful, and it hadn't mattered at all. "I'm his father. Biology isn't everything." Caroline pulled out her phone, barely glancing at him. "Ross is moving in this weekend. He'll be a much better male influence for Isaac. Someone successful, someone with ambition." Ross Gould, Caroline's older brother, had the kind of swagger that came from never being told no. He'd made his opinions about Marcus clear from the beginning. Community college teacher, no family money, no connections. Not good enough for a Gould. Marcus stood slowly, moving to the window. Isaac had caught a firefly and was watching it glow between his cupped hands, his small face illuminated with wonder. "Does Isaac know that I'm leaving? He knows you're going away for a while. We told him you had to go for work." She paused, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "He asked if you were coming back. I said probably not." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marcus turned, and for just a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Something Caroline had never seen before, something that made her take an involuntary step back. Then it was gone, and he was just Marcus again. Ordinary, defeated Marcus. "I'll pick up my things tomorrow," he said quietly. "Actually, you'll pick them up tonight. Ross wants to start moving his stuff in tomorrow morning. Your belongings are already boxed in the garage. I had the locks changed an hour ago." She held up a hand before he could speak. "Don't make a scene. My father has connections with the police department. One call, and you'll be explaining to a judge why you were trespassing and threatening me." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. 9 years of marriage, and he'd never really known her at all. Or maybe he had, and he'd just been so desperate for normal that he'd ignored every sign. "Can I say goodbye to Isaac?" Caroline considered this, then shook her head. "Better for him if you just go. Clean break. That's what the family therapist recommended." "The family therapist you hired?" "The family therapist my father's lawyer recommended, yes." She checked her phone again. "I have dinner plans with Daddy and Mother. You need to be gone before I get back. The boxes are labeled. Don't take anything that isn't in them." She left without another word, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors he'd refinished himself 2 summers ago. Through the window, Marcus watched her walk past Isaac without stopping, calling something over her shoulder about spending the night at Grandma's house. Isaac's face fell, but he nodded obediently. The boy looked toward the kitchen window, and Marcus raised a hand in a small wave. Isaac waved back, confused but trusting. Always trusting. Marcus waited until Caroline's Mercedes pulled out of the driveway before he went to the garage. 6 boxes, everything he owned in the world reduced to cardboard and packing tape. His clothes, his books, his laptop, the few photographs they'd allowed him to keep. Nothing of value, nothing that mattered to the Goulds. He loaded the boxes into his 10-year-old Honda Civic, the car Caroline had always been embarrassed to be seen in. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Through the fence, he could hear Isaac talking to himself, creating elaborate stories for the fireflies. Marcus sat in the driver's seat, key in the ignition, and allowed himself exactly 60 seconds. 60 seconds to feel the weight of it all. The house he'd lost, the son he was losing, the life he'd built so carefully now demolished by people who saw him as nothing more than an inconvenience. When the 60 seconds ended, he started the car. He'd find a motel, something cheap where they didn't ask questions. He'd prepare for the custody hearing, even though Vincent Compton, the Gould family's lawyer, had already made it clear that Marcus would be lucky to see Isaac at all. He'd figure out what came next. As he pulled away from the house, his house, where every room held memories of Isaac's first steps, first words, first everything, Marcus caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, he barely recognized the man looking back. The Starlight Motel had seen better days, probably sometime in the 1970s. Marcus paid cash for a week, ignoring the clerk's knowing look. Room 237 smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner, the wallpaper peeling in the corners, the TV bolted to the dresser. He set his boxes against the wall and sat on the bed, feeling the springs protest beneath him. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The hearing's been moved up. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Judge Morrison's chambers. Come prepared to explain your inadequacy as a father. VC. Vincent Compton. Thomas Gould's attack dog, a man who billed $800 an hour to destroy people in court. Marcus had scraped together $3,000 for a public defender who'd met with him once for 20 minutes and advised him to settle. Another text, this one from Caroline. Don't embarrass yourself tomorrow. Sign the custody agreement, and this can be painless. Fight, and I'll make sure you never see Isaac again. Marcus set the phone down carefully. The room was quiet except for the sound of traffic on the highway outside, the occasional slam of a door from another room. He opened his laptop and pulled up the folder he'd been compiling. Documentation of his involvement in Isaac's life, photographs, school records, evidence of being a present father. It wouldn't matter. He knew that. Thomas Gould had been planning this for months, probably since his heart attack made him confront his mortality and the future of his empire. Caroline needed to be free to marry someone appropriate, someone from their world. Isaac needed to be raised properly with the right influences and connections. Marcus Hoffman, community college teacher, had always been temporary. He'd just been too naive to see it. At midnight, he gave up pretending to sleep and drove to an all-night diner. The waitress, a tired woman named Fran according to her name tag, brought him coffee without asking and left him alone in his corner booth. He spread out his papers and tried to prepare for a fight he couldn't win. The diner's television played the late news on mute. Local real estate mogul Thomas Gould was expanding his development portfolio, breaking ground on luxury condos that would displace a historic neighborhood. The reporter interviewed protesters, then cut to Thomas himself, silver-haired and distinguished, dismissing their concerns with practiced charm. That's all for tonight, honey, Fran asked, refilling his coffee for the 4th time. Marcus nodded, gathering his papers. Thanks for the coffee. You look like a man with troubles. She said it kindly without prying. Just a custody hearing tomorrow. I'm going to lose my son. Fran studied him for a moment. You a good father? I try to be. Then don't give up before you even fight. She patted his shoulder and moved to the next table, and Marcus wondered what she'd say if she knew the fight was already over. He returned to the motel at 2 in the morning and lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Caroline. Forgot to mention, we're telling Isaac you abandoned him. Easier that way. Don't try to contact him. We'll call it harassment. Marcus closed his eyes and practiced the breathing exercises that used to keep him calm when everything was falling apart. When his heart rate finally slowed, he opened his eyes and pulled up a photograph of Isaac on his phone. The boy's gap-toothed smile, his messy dark hair, the way his eyes crinkled just like Marcus's own. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the image. "I'm so sorry I can't protect you from them." But even as he said it, something nagged at the back of his mind. Something he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it existed. A skill set, a way of thinking, a version of himself he'd sworn he'd never become again. Marcus set the phone down and forced himself to sleep. Tomorrow he'd go to the hearing. Tomorrow he'd fight with the limited weapons he had. Tomorrow he'd probably lose. And after tomorrow, he'd figure out what came next. Judge Morrison's chambers were designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, photographs of the judge with various politicians and dignitaries. Marcus sat across from Vincent Compton, who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread for successful predators. Compton's suit probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Caroline sat beside her lawyer, refusing to meet Marcus's eyes. She dressed for the role, modest blouse, pearl necklace, just enough makeup to look natural. The wronged wife, forced to protect her son from an inadequate father. Marcus's public defender, a young woman named Jessica Leach who looked fresh out of law school, shuffled papers nervously. She'd already told him twice that morning to accept whatever deal Compton offered. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone stood. He was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 50, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses and country clubs. Of course, Thomas Gould probably belonged to the same clubs. "Let's make this quick," Morrison said, settling behind his desk. "I have a full docket today. Mr. Compton, present your case." Compton stood, and Marcus watched a master at work. In 15 minutes, he painted a picture of Marcus Hoffman as a man-child who'd never lived up to his responsibilities. A community college teacher with no ambition, no savings, no ability to provide for his son. A man who'd been content to let his wife's family support them while he pursued his intellectual hobbies. "My client has been patient," Compton said, his voice smooth as oil. "She's tried to make this marriage work despite her husband's complete lack of drive or ambition. But she must think of Isaac now. The boy deserves stability, educational opportunities, exposure to culture, and success. Mr. Hoffman can provide none of these things." Jessica Leach barely put up a fight. She mentioned Marcus's involvement in Isaac's school, his coaching of the boys' soccer team, his attendance at every parent-teacher conference. It sounded weak even to Marcus's ears, and Morrison was already looking bored. "Mr. Hoffman," the judge said, cutting Jessica off mid-sentence. "Do you have anything to add?" Marcus stood slowly. He'd prepared a speech about being a good father, about love mattering more than money, about Isaac needing his dad. But looking at Morrison's expression, at Compton's satisfied smirk, at Caroline's cold indifference, he knew it was pointless. "I love my son," he said quietly. "That's all I have to say." Morrison sighed. "I'm sure you do, Mr. Hoffman. But love doesn't pay for private school or music lessons or college funds. Mrs. Hoffman will retain primary custody. You'll have supervised visitation every other Sunday, pending a psychological evaluation to ensure you're fit for even that level of access. The court will appoint." "Your Honor," Compton interrupted smoothly, "my client requests no visitation at this time. Mr. Hoffman has become unstable, sending threatening text messages, showing up at the family home unannounced." "That's a lie," Marcus said, his voice still calm. "We have documentation." Compton produced his phone, showing what appeared to be a text thread with threatening messages from Marcus's number. Messages he'd never sent. Morrison barely looked at them. "Mr. Hoffman, I'm inclined to agree with Mrs. Hoffman's concerns. No visitation for 6 months, at which point we'll revisit based on your progress in court-ordered therapy and anger management." Jessica Leach opened her mouth, then closed it again. She knew when a case was lost. 6 months. Marcus repeated. "Be grateful it's not permanent." Morrison said. And Mr. Hoffman? If you violate this order in any way, if you attempt to contact your son, if you go near the family residence, you'll be arrested. Am I clear? Marcus nodded slowly. The room felt very far away suddenly, like he was watching this happen to someone else. Good. Mrs. Hoffman, Mr. Compton, you're free to go. Morrison signed the papers without looking up again. Caroline stood, smoothing her skirt. As she passed Marcus, she leaned in close enough to whisper, "Enjoy the streets, Marcus. That's where men like you belong." Then she was gone, Compton trailing behind her like a well-fed shark. Jessica Leach gathered her papers. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hoffman. Sometimes the system, sometimes it's not fair. You can appeal, but honestly, with their resources, you'd just be throwing away money you don't have." She left him sitting there in the empty chamber, staring at nothing. He walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine that felt like an insult. His phone buzzed with an email from his landlord. The owner of the motel had decided to close for renovations. He had 3 days to vacate. Marcus sat in his car and pulled up his bank account. After paying Jessica Leach's retainer, he had $800 left. Not enough for a new place, not enough for anything. That night, he slept in the Honda parked behind a 24-hour grocery store. He'd removed the back seats earlier, creating just enough space to stretch out. It wasn't comfortable, but he'd slept in worse places a lifetime ago. For 3 nights, he rotated between parking lots, always moving before dawn, always careful not to attract attention. He showered at a truck stop, ate at cheap diners, and tried to figure out what came next. On the 4th night, he parked behind an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The area was industrial, deserted after dark, and nobody would bother him there. He was almost asleep when the flashlight beam hit his face. "Out of the car," a voice commanded. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus stepped out slowly, hands raised. 2 cops, both young, both with their hands near their weapons. The taller one, his nameplate read A. Hurd kept the flashlight trained on Marcus while his partner called in the car's plates. "This is private property," Officer Hurd said. "You're trespassing." "I didn't know." "I'll move." "Little late for that." "Let's see some ID." Marcus handed over his driver's license. Hurd studied it, then him, clearly trying to figure out if this was worth the paperwork. His partner returned from the squad car. "Plates are clean. Just some guy. Some homeless guy," Hurd corrected. "Sir, you can't sleep here. We're going to have to take you in, let you spend the night somewhere with a roof. For your own safety." Marcus almost laughed. For his own safety. "Officer, I appreciate the concern, but it's not a request." Hurd's voice hardened. "Turn around, hands behind your back." The handcuffs were familiar in a way that made Marcus's jaw clench. He'd been on the other side of this equation before in other countries, other lives. He let them cuff him, let them put him in the back of the squad car, and try to shut down the part of his brain that was calculating angles and weaknesses and ways to escape. "You're not that person anymore," he reminded himself. "That person is dead." The police station was bright and fluorescent, smelling of coffee and industrial soap. They sat him in a holding area while Hurd filled out paperwork. Standard procedure. Fingerprints, booking photos, personal effects inventoried. Andrew, run his prints through the system. The desk sergeant called out. "Make sure he's not wanted for anything." Hurd pressed Marcus's fingers onto the digital scanner one by one. "This'll just take a minute, Mr. Hoffman. Then we'll get you processed and find you a bunk for the night." Marcus watched the scanner upload his prints to the database. Watched the screen start a process. Watched it happen in slow motion, like a car crash he couldn't stop. The screen flashed red. Then it flashed again, a different shade of red. Then the computer started beeping, a shrill alarm that made every head in the station turn. Officer Hurd stepped back from the screen, his face going pale. "Sarge, I don't know what we've got." The desk sergeant came over, took one look at the screen, and grabbed the phone. He spoke quickly, quietly, his eyes never leaving Marcus. Within 3 minutes, the station captain appeared. David Bliss was a barrel-chested man in his late 50s with a weathered look of someone who'd worked his way up from beat cop. He studied the screen, studied Marcus, then studied the screen again. "Everyone out," Bliss said quietly. "Clear this area." Now, officers looked at each other, but obeyed, filing out until only Bliss and Marcus remained. Bliss pulled up a chair and sat down slowly, like his legs might not support him. According to this, he said, his voice shaking slightly, "You're Nathaniel Burke." Marcus said nothing. Nathaniel Burke, who was killed in action in Chechnya 12 years ago. Nathaniel Burke, whose file is classified at a level I've never seen before. Nathaniel Burke, who shouldn't exist. Bliss paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The system wants me to call a number," he continued. "Just one number. No explanation. It wants me to secure you in isolation, allow no contact with anyone, and wait." He laughed, a sound without humor. "In 32 years on the force, I've never seen anything like this." Marcus met his eyes. "Then you should probably make that call, Captain." Bliss stood, moved to the phone, then stopped. "Who are you?" "Really? I'm Marcus Hoffman, community college teacher. Divorced father who just lost custody of his son. That's all I am now." "Bullshit." Bliss picked up the phone. "Nobody with your clearance level just becomes a community college teacher." He dialed the number, and Marcus listened to one side of a conversation that made the captain's face go from pale to ashen. When Bliss hung up, he looked at Marcus like he was seeing a ghost. "They're sending someone. They said you'd be held in complete isolation until they arrive." He paused. "They also said to tell you, Nightingale Protocol is still active." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Nightingale Protocol, a code phrase he hadn't heard in over a decade, from a life he'd buried so deep he'd convinced himself it had never existed. Bliss led him to an interrogation room and closed the door. Marcus sat in the metal chair and waited, his mind racing through possibilities. Who would they send? How much did they know about his current situation? And why, after 12 years of successful invisibility, had his past chosen now to resurface? He didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and a man walked in whom Marcus recognized immediately, even though he'd aged considerably. Julian Kramer looked like he'd spent the last 12 years in a war zone, which he probably had. Gray hair, hard eyes, the kind of lean muscle that came from never being comfortable. He set a manila folder on the table and studied Marcus for a long moment. "Nathaniel fucking Burke," he finally said. "I really thought you were dead." "I am dead," Marcus replied. "Has been for 12 years. And yet here you are, getting arrested for trespassing behind a warehouse. Living out of your car. Really living the dream, Nate. It's Marcus now, and how I live is none of your concern." Julian opened the folder. "You know what's in here? Your service record. The real one, not the sanitized version they give to the families of dead operatives. 13 successful, deep cover operations. 6 languages fluent for more conversational. Expert in psychological manipulation, asset recruitment, and tactical deception. The kind of man who could disappear into a foreign country and emerge 3 months later with intelligence that saved thousands of lives. That was someone else. Was it? Julian pulled out a photograph. Grozny, 2013. Remember that? Marcus didn't want to look, but he did. The photo showed a younger version of himself, bearded and hollow-eyed, standing in the rubble of a Chechen city. He barely recognized the man in that image. "You were our best," Julian continued. "The operation that killed you was supposed to be your last. Extract the target, bring him home, retire with honor. Instead, everything went to hell. Your entire team was compromised. We barely got you out alive, and only by declaring you Kia and giving you a new identity. I know all this, Julian. Why are you here? Because someone just ran your fingerprints through a federal database, and every single alarm in our system went off. And when I pulled your file to see where the hell you've been, I found something interesting." He pushed another document across the table. "You got married, had a kid, became a teacher." His voice held a note of disbelief. "You went suburban, Nate. I went normal. That was the deal. New identity, new life, no contact with the agency. The deal also assumed you'd stay under the radar, not get arrested for sleeping in your car." Marcus felt anger flare, hot and sharp. "I lost my son. My wife's family took everything. You want to judge me for that?" Julian's expression softened slightly. "No, I want to understand how someone with your skills ended up in this position. Because the Nathaniel Burke I knew would never have let himself be backed into a corner like this. That's because you knew a different person. Someone who didn't mind getting his hands dirty, who saw people as assets and obstacles. I buried him. For 12 years, I was just Marcus. I was happy being just Marcus. And now, Marcus didn't answer immediately. He thought of Isaac, of the custody hearing, of Caroline's cruel smile, and Thomas Gould's calculated destruction of everything he built. Now I don't know who I am anymore. Julian closed the folder and leaned back. The agency can't get directly involved in your personal life. But here's what I can do. I can make this arrest disappear. I can arrange for you to have access to resources off the books. And I can remind you that you're not powerless, Nate. You just forgot what you're capable of. I don't want to be that person again. Maybe you don't have a choice. Maybe the world doesn't let good men stay good when evil men are actively working against them. Julian stood. Think about it. I'll be in town for another 24 hours. If you want help, real help, you know how to find me. He left Marcus alone in the interrogation room. 10 minutes later, Captain Bliss appeared. You're free to go, he said quietly. The arrest is being expunged from our records. Officially, tonight never happened. He paused at the door. I don't know what you did or who you are, Mr. Hoffman, but I hope you use whatever resources you have for good. Marcus walked out of the police station into a cool pre-dawn. His car was parked in the lot, keys waiting in the ignition. Everything had been returned to him, including his phone. One new voicemail from block number. Julian's voice. The Starlight Motel reopens tomorrow. Room 237 is available, paid in advance for a month. Use the time wisely. Marcus sat in the Honda and watched the sun rise over a city he'd lived in for 9 years without really seeing it. For 9 years, he'd been Marcus Hoffman, mild-mannered teacher, devoted father, ordinary man. For 9 years, he'd convinced himself that Nathaniel Burke was truly dead. But Nathaniel Burke wasn't dead. He'd just been sleeping, and the Gould family had made a terrible mistake in waking him up. Marcus started the car and drove toward the motel, his mind already beginning to work in ways it hadn't in over a decade. Analyzing patterns, identifying leverage points, constructing strategies. Thomas Gould was a real estate developer with political connections. There would be corruption, shortcuts, dirty money. Men like that always left trails. Caroline wanted to keep Isaac from him. Fine, but she'd assumed she was dealing with a helpless teacher, someone who would accept defeat with quiet dignity. She had no idea who she was really up against. Marcus pulled into the motel parking lot as the morning light turned everything gold. Room 237 was waiting, the key under the mat, just like Julian said it would be. The room had been cleaned, fresh sheets on the bed, and on the desk sat a laptop he didn't recognize. He opened it to find a single folder labeled Resources. Inside were contact numbers, access codes, and account information for resources he'd thought were lost forever. Julian had given him the tools. The rest was up to him. Marcus sat on the bed and pulled up a photograph of Isaac on his phone. His son's innocent smile, unaware that his father had been declared unfit, that he was being told lies about abandonment. I'm coming for you, Marcus whispered to the image. And I'm going to make sure they never hurt you again. But first, he needed to know exactly who he was dealing with. And for that, he needed to become someone he'd sworn he'd never be again. He opened the laptop and started to work. The Gould family compound sat on 15 acres of prime real estate overlooking the city, a monument to Thomas Gould's success and ego. Marcus watched from a distance through binoculars, cataloging details, security cameras at each entrance, a guard booth at the main gate, motion sensors along the perimeter. Not sophisticated enough to stop a determined professional, but more than sufficient to deter casual trespassers. He'd spent 3 days researching, using the resources Julian had provided. The laptop had access to databases that technically didn't exist, surveillance tools that were definitely illegal, and contact information for people Marcus had once worked with in darker corners of the world. What he discovered made his jaw clench with anger. Thomas Gould's real estate empire was built on a foundation of corruption that went deeper than Marcus had imagined. Zoning violations covered up by bribes to city officials. Construction projects approved despite failing safety inspections. properties seized through questionable legal maneuvers, displacing families who couldn't afford to fight back. And at the center of it all, Thomas himself, insulated by layers of shell companies and legal deniability. But that wasn't what made Marcus's hands shake as he lowered the binoculars. Isaac was in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball by himself. Even from this distance, Marcus could see his son's dejection, the way he kept looking toward the house like he was waiting for someone who never came. Caroline was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Ross or Meredith. They'd taken everything from Marcus to save their empire, but they couldn't even be bothered to spend time with the child they'd fought so hard to possess. His phone buzzed. A text from Julian. Making progress? Marcus replied, found what I need. Starting phase 1 tomorrow. Remember, I can't officially support this. I know. That's why it's perfect. Marcus drove back to the motel, his mind organizing information into actionable intelligence. He'd identified 3 key vulnerabilities in Thomas Gould's empire. First, Vincent Compton, the family lawyer. Compton had his fingers in every dirty deal Thomas had ever made, which meant he knew where all the bodies were buried. But lawyers were motivated by self-interest, and self-interest could be manipulated. Second, Ross Gould. Caroline's brother was arrogant, impulsive, and stupid, a dangerous combination for someone involved in the family business. He left trails because he thought himself untouchable. Third, Caroline herself. She'd married Marcus thinking he was nobody, and she still thought he was nobody. Her contempt would make her careless. Marcus spent the evening creating a timeline, a strategic map of how to dismantle the Gould family piece by piece. It would require precision, patience, and a willingness to cross lines he'd spent 12 years pretending didn't exist. By midnight, he had a plan. The next morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He went shopping for a proper suit. Not expensive. He couldn't afford expensive, but well-fitted and professional. He got a haircut at a barbershop that didn't ask questions, shaved carefully, and looked at himself in the mirror. Nathaniel Burke looked back at him. His first stop was the law office of Angela Dodd, a family law attorney whose name he'd found through the resources Julian provided. Unlike Vincent Compton, Angela had built her practice representing people who couldn't afford high-powered lawyers. She worked out of a cramped office above a dry cleaner, and when Marcus walked in, she looked up from a mountain of paperwork with tired eyes. "Help you. I need to hire you," Marcus said, "for a custody case. Consultation fee is $200. If I take your case, my retainer is $5,000. Marcus set an envelope on her desk. "That's $7,000. I need you to do something that might be ethically questionable." Angela opened the envelope, counted the bills, then looked at him with new interest. "I'm listening. I need you to file a motion for an emergency custody hearing. Claim that new evidence has emerged regarding the fitness of the custodial parent. You won't have the evidence yet, but you will have it by the time the hearing is scheduled." "That's not how this works, Mr. Hoffman." "Marcus Hoffman." He sat down without being invited. "In 2 weeks, evidence is going to emerge that Caroline Gould is an unfit mother. Evidence of substance abuse, neglect, and potentially endangering her child. When that happens, there needs to be a legal mechanism already in motion to act on it. You're asking me to file a motion based on evidence that doesn't exist yet. I'm asking you to file a motion based on evidence that will exist. There's a difference." Angela studied him for a long moment. "If you're planning to frame this woman, I'm planning to expose who she really is. There's a difference there too." Marcus leaned forward. "Tell me, Ms. Dodd, how many custody cases have you lost to Vincent Compton?" Her jaw tightened. "That's not relevant." 12. "I did my research. 12 cases in the last 3 years where you represented good parents against wealthy clients who retained Compton. You lost every single one because money and connections beat justice in family court. What's your point?" "My point is that in 2 weeks, you're going to have a chance to beat Vincent Compton in front of Judge Morrison. You're going to have evidence so damning that even Morrison's connections to the Gould family won't matter. And when it's over, you're going to get custody for a father who actually loves his son." Angela tapped the envelope thoughtfully. "I could get disbarred for this. Only if we lose. If we win, you'll be the lawyer who took down the Gould family. Your practice will triple overnight. She was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up a pen. Tell me about your son. Marcus talked about Isaac for 20 minutes. About teaching him to ride a bike, about bedtime stories and soccer practice, about a little boy who deserved better than being a pawn in his mother's family's power games. By the time he finished, Angela was nodding. I'll file the motion tomorrow. But Mr. Hoffman, whatever evidence you're planning to gather, make sure it's real. I won't be party to fraud. It'll be real, Marcus promised. More real than anyone wants it to be. His next stop was less legal. The Rusty Anchor was the kind of bar where people went to disappear, located in a neighborhood the city liked to pretend didn't exist. Marcus had gotten the address from one of Julian's contacts, along with a name, Frank Ingram. Ingram was sitting at the end of the bar, nursing a whiskey that looked like it wasn't his first of the day. He was in his 40s, with the hard look of someone who'd done things they try to forget. Former military intelligence, dishonorably discharged for reasons that were classified, now working as a private investigator who didn't worry too much about legal niceties. Marcus slid onto the stool next to him. Frank Ingram? Depends on who's asking. Someone with a job that pays well and doesn't ask questions. Ingram turned to look at him, eyes calculating. You don't look like my usual clientele. I used to work for the same people you did. Different division. That got Ingram's attention. Who gave you my name? Julian Kramer. Ingram whistled softly. Kramer doesn't give out my name to just anyone. What's the job? Surveillance and evidence gathering. Target is Ross Gould, son of Thomas Gould, the real estate developer. I need documentation of everything illegal he's doing, and I know he's doing plenty. The Goulds have serious protection. Private security, connections with local law enforcement, lawyers on retainer. Which is why I need someone who knows how to work around all that. 2 weeks of surveillance, comprehensive documentation, $10,000. Ingram's eyebrows rose. That's generous. I'm motivated. Marcus slid a folder across the bar. Everything you need to know about Ross Gould. His routines, his associates, his weaknesses. I need evidence that will stand up in court, but I also need the kind of evidence that won't. Blackmail material. Insurance policy. Whatever you want to call it. Ingram opened the folder, skimmed the contents, and let out a low whistle. You really did your homework. Where'd you get all this? I told you I used to work for the same people you did. I still have access to some resources. And what happens when Ross Gould figures out he's being investigated? He won't. You're that good, and he's that arrogant. Marcus stood to leave. 2 weeks, Frank. Everything you can find. And if you discover evidence of child endangerment or neglect, I want to know immediately. Ingram pocketed the folder and the envelope of cash Marcus left on the bar. I'll be in touch. Marcus spent the next 3 days setting up the rest of his plan. He created anonymous social media accounts and began documenting Thomas Gould's properties, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities. He filed public records requests for building permits and zoning approvals. He reached out to 3 tenants who'd been displaced by Gould developments, people with grudges and stories to tell. Every evening, he drove past the Gould compound and watched Isaac through his binoculars. His son was playing alone more often than not, increasingly withdrawn. On the 4th night, Marcus saw Caroline pull into the driveway at 11 p.m., clearly drunk, and stumble into the house without checking on Isaac at all. He documented everything. On day 5, Frank Ingram called. You're not going to believe what I've found. They met at the Rusty Anchor again. Ingram spread photographs across the bar. Ross Gould meeting with known criminals, accepting packages that were clearly drugs, visiting properties that were fronts for money laundering. But the worst images showed Ross at the Gould compound, obviously high, while Isaac played in the background. He's using the house where your kid lives, Ingram said grimly. Cocaine, probably other stuff. I've got video of him dealing from one of his father's properties. This guy's a walking indictment. Marcus felt ice settle in his stomach. Where's Caroline during all this? Shopping mostly. Lunches with friends. I followed her for 3 days, and she spent maybe 30 minutes total with your kid. The grandmother's not much better. They've got a nanny who does most of the actual childcare. Give me everything. Every photo, every video, every piece of evidence. I want a complete dossier by the end of the week. Already done. Ingram handed over a flash drive. But Marcus? Whatever you're planning, be careful. The Goulds have destroyed people for less. They've already destroyed me. Now it's my turn. Marcus spent that night reviewing Ingram's evidence. It was damning. More than enough to win a custody case. Enough to potentially bring criminal charges against Ross. But he needed more. He needed something that would crack the family's carefully constructed facade wide open. The answer came from an unexpected source, Thomas Gould himself. Julian called late that night. Thought you might want to know, Thomas Gould just fired Vincent Compton. Marcus sat up. Why? Apparently Compton was embezzling from the family trust. Thomas found out, threatened to go to the Bar Association. Compton's lawyering career is about to implode. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. A desperate lawyer was a useful lawyer. Where is Compton now? Probably at his office, trying to figure out how to save his career. Marcus hung up and dressed quickly. Vincent Compton's law office was in a gleaming high-rise downtown, the kind of place that screamed success and money. At midnight, the building was nearly empty except for cleaning crews and workaholics. Marcus rode the elevator to the 17th floor and walked straight into Compton's office. The lawyer was at his desk, surrounded by files, looking like a man watching his world collapse. Compton looked up, startled. What did you get in here? I'm good at getting into places I'm not supposed to be. Marcus sat down across from him. You and I need to talk. If this is about your custody case, it's about your career. I know Thomas Gould fired you. I know why. And I know that in about 3 days, he's going to make sure you never practice law again in this state. Compton's face went white. How do you know that? Because I know how men like Thomas Gould operate. He doesn't just fire people. He destroys them, makes examples of them. You've seen it yourself. You've helped him do it to others. Get out of my office. In a moment. First, I'm going to make you an offer. You help me, and I help you. Compton laughed bitterly. You? You're a broke teacher who just lost custody of his kid. What could you possibly offer me? Marcus pulled out a folder and laid it on the desk. Immunity. I have connections you don't know about. I can make the embezzlement charges disappear. I can even get you a new client base. People who need lawyers to take on powerful enemies. You'll rebuild your practice, maybe better than before. In exchange for what? In exchange for everything you know about Thomas Gould's illegal activities. Every bribe, every payoff, every dirty deal. You've been his lawyer for 15 years. You know where all the bodies are buried. Compton stared at the folder. He'll destroy me if I testify against him. He's going to destroy you anyway. At least this way, you take him down with you. And you walk away with your law license and a future. Marcus leaned forward. I'm offering you a choice, Vincent. Take it or leave it. But decide now because this offer expires the moment I walk out that door. The lawyer was quiet for a long time, his hands shaking as he reached for the folder. When he opened it and saw the documented evidence of his embezzlement, evidence that could be made to disappear, his resistance crumbled. What do you need from me? Marcus smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Everything. And I need it by tomorrow. 24 hours later, Marcus sat in Angela Dodd's office with a briefcase full of evidence that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Financial records showing Thomas Gould's bribes to city officials. Testimony from Vincent Compton outlining decades of corruption. Photographs and videos of Ross Gould's drug use and dealing. Documentation of Caroline's neglect and substance abuse. And at the center of it all, one simple truth. Isaac Hoffman was living in a dangerous, unstable environment with people who saw him as a possession, not a person. Angela looked through the evidence with growing amazement. Where did you get all this? From people who were tired of being afraid. From a lawyer who realized he was going down anyway. From professionals who know how to find things people want to hide. Marcus met her eyes. Can we win? Win? Marcus, with this evidence, I can get full custody back for you within a week. I can get the Goulds investigated by every law enforcement agency in the state. This isn't just winning a custody case. This is destroying their entire empire. Good. File the emergency motion tomorrow. Request a hearing as soon as possible. What about the criminal evidence? The drugs, the corruption? I'm handling that separately. Different channels. Marcus stood to leave. One more thing. When we go to court, Caroline and her family are going to try to destroy my credibility. They're going to bring up my lack of income, my instability, everything they can think of. We have evidence that trumps all of that. I know, but I need you to be prepared for them to dig deep into my past. They might find things that seem inconsistent with who I claim to be. Angela's eyes narrowed. Is there something I should know? Just that I've lived a complicated life before I became Marcus Hoffman. If questions come up, trust that I can answer them. But don't let it derail the case. Marcus, I need to know if there's anything in your past that could. There's nothing that changes the fundamental truth. I'm a good father who loves his son. Everything else is just noise. He left her office before she could press further. The last pieces were falling into place, but he needed one more element to ensure complete victory. He needed Thomas Gould to know he was coming. That evening, Marcus composed a simple email from an anonymous account and sent it to Thomas Gould's personal address. Mr. Gould, you took my son because you thought I was powerless. You were wrong. In 72 hours, everything you've built will come crashing down. I'm giving you this warning not out of mercy, but because I want you to know it's coming. Enjoy the next 3 days. They're the last ones you'll spend as a free man. The ghost you created. He hit send and smiled. Let Thomas spend the next 3 days in fear, wondering who knew his secrets and how they'd gotten them. Let him panic and make mistakes. Men like Thomas Gould were only dangerous when they felt in control. Take that away, and they crumbled. Marcus's phone rang. Julian Kramer. I just got a very interesting call from a federal prosecutor, Julian said without preamble. Someone anonymously submitted evidence of massive corruption involving a real estate developer named Thomas Gould. Evidence that's so comprehensive and damning that they're talking about RICO charges. Interesting coincidence. Nate, what are you doing? Why should I have done the moment they took my son? I'm fighting back. You're starting a war. No, Marcus corrected. They started a war when they took Isaac. I'm just finishing it. Julian was quiet for a moment. The federal case will take time to build. Months, maybe years. I don't need the federal case. That's just insurance. The custody hearing is in 3 days. That's when I get my son back. And after that, I make sure the Gould family can never hurt anyone again. Thomas, Meredith, Ross, Caroline, all of them. They're going to learn that some people can't be pushed around just because they have money and connections. You sound like the old Nate, the one who didn't worry about collateral damage. Maybe that's who I need to be right now. Maybe Marcus Hoffman was always a fantasy, and this is who I really am. Or maybe you're both, and you just need to find the balance. Julian paused. I can't officially support what you're doing. I know, but unofficially, burn them to the ground. Marcus hung up and spent the next 2 days preparing for the custody hearing. He rehearsed his testimony with Angela, reviewed every piece of evidence, and prepared himself for the fight of his life. On the morning of the hearing, he dressed in his suit and looked at himself in the mirror. Marcus Hoffman, community college teacher. Nathaniel Burke, intelligence operative. 2 names, 2 identities, 1 person. He was going to court to get his son back. And nothing, not money, not power, not connections, was going to stop him. The courthouse was crowded when he arrived, but Angela had secured a private conference room for them to prepare. She spread out the evidence one final time, organizing it for maximum impact. They're going to attack your character first, she said. Try to paint you as unstable, unreliable, unfit. Stay calm, stick to the truth, and let me handle Compton. Compton's not their lawyer anymore. Angela looked up sharply. What? Thomas Gould fired him. They'll have someone new. Probably someone who doesn't know about all this yet. He gestured to the evidence. That's even better. They'll be unprepared. The door opened, and Caroline walked in with her new lawyer, a woman Marcus didn't recognize, expensive suit and briefcase, practically screaming money. Behind them came Thomas and Meredith Gould, both looking confident and contemptuous. Ross was noticeably absent. The new lawyer introduced herself as Sylvia Plummer, senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms. She looked at Marcus like he was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Mr. Hoffman, she said coolly, I've reviewed your case. I'm prepared to offer you a generous settlement. Supervised visitation twice a month, provided you complete court-ordered therapy and anger management. Sign the agreement, and we can avoid the unpleasantness of a hearing. Marcus looked at Caroline. She was avoiding his eyes, staring at her phone with studied indifference. Thomas Gould, however, met his gaze with open hostility. "No deal," Marcus said quietly. Plummer sighed. "Very well, but I should warn you, we have evidence of your instability, your harassment of my clients, your complete inability to provide for a child. This hearing is a formality. You've already lost." "Have I?" Marcus smiled. "Guess we'll find out." They filed into Judge Morrison's chambers. The judge looked annoyed at having his schedule disrupted by an emergency hearing, and his expression suggested he was ready to dismiss the whole thing quickly, until Angela Dodd stood up and began presenting evidence. It started with the photographs of Ross Gould using drugs in the house where Isaac lived. Morrison's expression shifted from annoyed to concerned. Then came the videos of Caroline's neglect, her late-night returns obviously intoxicated, her complete absence from Isaac's life. Plummer objected repeatedly, but Angela had documented everything legally. She'd done her homework, and the evidence was admissible. Then came Vincent Compton's testimony, delivered via deposition. The former Gould family lawyer outlined in clinical detail the corruption, the bribes, the illegal activities that financed the lifestyle Isaac was being raised in. He described a family that saw people as obstacles and children as pawns. Morrison's face had gone pale. Thomas Gould was purple with rage, but Sylvia Plummer had her hand on his arm, keeping him quiet. The final piece was the report from Frank Ingram, private investigator, documenting 2 weeks of surveillance showing a child who was ignored, isolated, and surrounded by criminal activity. When Angela finished, the chambers were silent except for the sound of Thomas Gould's heavy breathing. Morrison looked at Caroline. "Mrs. Hoffman, is any of this true?" Caroline opened her mouth, closed it, then looked at her lawyer helplessly. "Your Honor," Plummer said quickly, "even if some of these allegations have merit, that doesn't change the fact that Mr. Hoffman is financially unable to provide for his son. He's living in a motel, unemployed." "Actually," Angela interrupted, "Mr. Hoffman has recently been offered a position as an adjunct professor at the state university. The salary is modest but stable, and he secured appropriate housing in a good school district." She slid the documentation across the judge's desk. Marcus had to work hard not to smile. Julian had arranged that particular detail. Morrison reviewed the documents, then looked at Marcus for a long moment. "Mr. Hoffman, do you have anything to add?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, I've saw my son back. Isaac deserves to be with someone who loves him, who puts his needs first, who sees him as a person and not a possession. I'm not perfect, and I don't have the Gould family's money or connections. But I'm his father, and I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure he's safe, happy, and loved." "This is outrageous," Thomas Gould exploded, standing up. "You can't seriously consider giving that nobody custody of my grandson." "I'll have your judgeship, Morrison." Mr. Gould," Morrison said icily, "you will sit down and be quiet, or I will hold you in contempt. In fact, given what I've just heard, I'm going to recommend that the district attorney's office take a very close look at your business practices." Thomas sat down, shaking with rage. Morrison turned back to Marcus and Caroline. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting Mr. Hoffman full custody effective immediately. Mrs. Hoffman will have supervised visitation rights, pending completion of a substance abuse evaluation and parenting classes. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full investigation into the living conditions at the Gould residence." Caroline burst into tears. Not, Marcus noticed, tears of sadness about losing Isaac, but tears of humiliation and defeat. "Your Honor, we intend to appeal," Plummer said, though her voice had lost its confident edge. "You're welcome to try, but I've documented everything here, and I suspect an appellate court will be very interested in the evidence of child endangerment." Morrison signed the custody order and handed it to Angela. "Mr. Hoffman, you can pick up your son from the Gould residence today. A court officer will accompany you." Marcus felt something break loose in his chest. Relief so intense it was almost painful. "Thank you, Your Honor." As they filed out of the chambers, Thomas Gould grabbed Marcus's arm. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started. Marcus looked down at the hand on his arm, then up at Thomas's furious face. For just a moment, he let the mask slip. Let Thomas see exactly who he was dealing with. No, Mr. Gould, you have no idea what you started when you took my son, but you're about to find out. He pulled his arm free and walked away, leaving Thomas staring after him with something that might have been fear in his eyes. The Gould compound looked different in daylight, less impressive now that Marcus knew what it really was, a facade hiding rot. He stood at the gate with Angela Dodd and Officer Andrew Hurd, waiting for someone to answer the intercom. After 3 minutes, Meredith Gould's voice crackled through the speaker. What do you want? Mrs. Gould, I'm Officer Hurd with the Court Services Division. We're here to execute a custody order. Please open the gate. I'll do no such thing. We're appealing that ridiculous decision. Ma'am, you can appeal all you want, but the order is effective immediately. If you don't open the gate, I'll call for backup and we'll enter by force. Your choice. Another long pause, then the gate swung open. They drove up the circular driveway to find Meredith waiting at the front door, her face tight with fury. This is kidnapping, she said as they approached. No, ma'am. Officer Hurd replied patiently. This is law enforcement executing a court order. Where's Isaac Hoffman? He's with his mother. Caroline is devastated. Mrs. Gould. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. Where's my son? Something in his tone made Meredith step back. In the media room. But you can't just take him. He doesn't even know you anymore. You'll traumatize him. The only trauma Isaac has experienced is being kept from his father by people who don't actually care about him. Marcus moved past her into the house. He found Isaac in a massive media room, sitting on a leather couch that dwarfed him, playing a video game by himself. The boy looked up when Marcus entered, and for a moment there was no recognition. Then Isaac's eyes widened. Dad! Marcus felt his throat close up. Hey, buddy. Isaac dropped the controller and ran to him, throwing his arms around Marcus's waist. I thought you went away forever. Grandma said you weren't coming back. I'm sorry I was gone for a little while. But I'm here now, and I'm never leaving you again. Marcus knelt down to meet Isaac's eyes. We need to go pack your things, okay? You're coming to live with me. Really? Hope and confusion warred on Isaac's face. But Mom said, I know what Mom said, but the judge decided you should be with me. Is that okay with you? Isaac nodded, so hard his whole body moved. Yes. Can I bring my soccer ball? And my dinosaur collection? You can bring anything that's yours. They went upstairs to Isaac's room, a space larger than most apartments, filled with expensive toys that the boy clearly barely played with. Marcus helped him pack clothes and toys into a duffel bag, making a mental note of how few personal items Isaac actually owned despite the wealth surrounding him. Caroline appeared in the doorway as they were finishing. She looked terrible, mascara running, eyes red from crying. You can't do this. I can and I am. Marcus zipped up the bag. You wanted to play games with custody because you and your family thought I was powerless. You were wrong. Isaac, honey, Caroline said, ignoring Marcus. You don't want to go with your father. Tell him you want to stay here. Isaac looked at his mother, then at Marcus, then back at his mother. I want to go with Dad. The words hit Caroline like a slap. You don't mean that. I'm your mother. You're never here, Isaac said quietly. Uncle Ross is always weird, and Grandma's always mad. Dad actually plays with me. Caroline's face crumpled. For a moment, Marcus almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Let's go, Isaac. He took his son's hand and led him downstairs, where Officer Hurd was waiting with Angela. Thomas Gould was in the foyer now, blocking their path. You think this is over, Hoffman? You think you've won? Marcus handed Isaac's bag to Angela and stepped closer, Thomas. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only Thomas could hear. In about 3 hours, federal agents are going to execute a search warrant on your offices. They're going to find evidence of 2 decades of corruption, bribery, and fraud. In about 6 hours, the U.S. Attorney is going to announce a RICO investigation into your organization. In about 12 hours, every news outlet in the state will be running stories about the Gould family's criminal enterprise. He paused, watching the color drain from Thomas's face. Your empire is over. Your reputation is destroyed. And your grandson, the child you claim to care so much about, will grow up knowing exactly what kind of man you are. Marcus picked up Isaac. So yes, Mr. Gould, I've won. He carried his son past Thomas's frozen form, past Meredith's shocked silence, past Caroline's desperate tears. Officer Hurd followed them out, and they drove away from the compound while Isaac pressed his face against the window, watching the only home he'd ever known disappear behind them. Dad, Isaac asked quietly, where are we going? Home, buddy. We're going home. The apartment Marcus had rented was small, a 2-bedroom in a modest neighborhood near Isaac's school. It wasn't fancy. It didn't have 15 acres or a guard booth or a media room. But it had pictures on the walls of Marcus and Isaac together, and a kitchen where they could cook together, and a backyard just big enough for soccer practice. Isaac explored every room, his excitement growing. This is where I'm going to live. This is where we're going to live. Together. No more grandma's house. Not unless you want to visit. But you don't have to. Isaac thought about this seriously, then shook his head. I like it here better. That night, Marcus made spaghetti while Isaac did homework at the kitchen table. It was ordinary, domestic, perfect. Everything he'd almost lost. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Federal investigation launched into Gould Development Corporation. Another alert. Thomas Gould arrested on corruption charges. Another. Real estate mogul's empire crumbles amid scandal. Marcus read them all while Isaac chatted about his day, about the things he'd missed, about how happy he was to be back with his dad. And Marcus realized that this moment, this normalcy, this peace was what he'd been fighting for all along. Not revenge, though that was sweet. Not justice, though that mattered. But this, a little boy safe and happy, eating spaghetti and laughing at his own jokes, completely unaware that his father had just dismantled a corrupt empire to protect him. Later, after Isaac was asleep, Marcus sat on the small balcony and called Julian. I saw the news, Julian said. Impressive work. It's not done yet. There's still the trial, the appeals. Nate, they're done. With the evidence you provided and Compton's testimony, Thomas is looking at 20 years minimum. Caroline and Ross are facing charges too. Meredith might get off with probation if she cooperates. You destroyed them. They destroyed themselves. I just helped along. And now, what happens to Nathaniel Burke? Marcus looked through the window at Isaac's sleeping form. Nathaniel Burke stays dead. He was useful when I needed him, but he's not who I want to be anymore. So who are you? I'm Marcus Hoffman. Father, teacher, maybe eventually more, but definitely not a ghost anymore. Julian was quiet for a moment. The agency could use someone with your skills. Consulting basis, your own terms. Not interested. I've got a 7-year-old who needs help with his homework and a soccer team that needs coaching. That's my mission now. Fair enough. But Nate, if you ever need anything, I'll call. But Julian? I'm hoping I never need to. He hung up and went inside, checking on Isaac one more time before bed. The boy was sprawled across his mattress, soccer ball clutched to his chest, peaceful in a way he hadn't been for months. Marcus pulled the blanket up over his son's shoulders and kissed his forehead. Sweet dreams, buddy, he whispered. You're safe now. I promise. In the morning, there would be reporters asking questions, lawyers filing motions, federal prosecutors building cases. The Gould family would try to salvage something from the wreckage, would probably blame Marcus for everything, would certainly appeal every decision and fight every charge. But Marcus Hoffman had his son back, and that made everything else just noise. He'd been tested, pushed to the edge, forced to become someone he'd sworn he'd never be again. And he'd done what needed to be done without losing himself completely. He'd used Nathaniel Burke's skills with Marcus Hoffman's heart, and somehow, miraculously, he'd won. The ghost they'd created had risen up to haunt them, and now that ghost could finally rest. Marcus Hoffman, just Marcus, just a father, just a man who'd fought for what mattered most, turned off the lights and went to bed, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Because tomorrow, he'd wake up in his own apartment, make breakfast with his son, and start rebuilding a life that was truly his own. No masks, no covers, no hiding. Just him and Isaac together. And that was more than enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.